God, take our minds and think through them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you. Amen. I have to say the hymn we just sang is one of my favorites. It became one of my favorites when I was at St. Luke's in Knoxville, the inter-city, interracial church that I served. It was a real big one with them. We sang it at just about every funeral, as a matter of fact. But it was especially fitting today, because throughout the scriptures today runs a common theme. It is the theme of God's faithfulness and our response. And the refrain to this hymn pretty much says better than I can even hope to begin to say what that faithfulness of God looks like. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand has provided. That captures God's faithfulness in just those few words. That we experience that faithfulness in the mercies that God provides for us day by day, and in the opportunities that God provides us moment by moment. And so that faithfulness becomes those mercies and those opportunities. And the response needed from us is the ability to see them. It's the ability to see them, take them to heart, and use them. Throughout the scriptures we read this morning, we see incredible examples of how that is happening, not only with individuals, but with the whole people. In the Old Testament reading from Jeremiah, we've been reading it week after week after week. We've read through the parts where Jeremiah kept warning the people that if they didn't turn around, that they were going to be overtaken. And they were overtaken and taken into exile, into Babylon. And so now Jeremiah's message switches from a message of warning to a message of hope, to a message of promise of God's mercies and God's opportunities. And the mercies and the opportunities that Jeremiah offers to them on behalf of the Lord are these, that they are to go in this place of exile. And instead of seeing themselves as just exiled in a foreign place, they are to live their lives as if they were still in Jerusalem. They are to live and to marry and to buy property and to build houses and to work for the good of their community and to do all of these things because God is going to be faithful to them even in exile and provide them with the opportunities and the mercy that they need. And then when we look to the psalm in just short verses recalls different things that God has done to deliver his people. The mercies and opportunities of deliverance. The times when God has turned the sea into dry land so that you could walk through on foot. And of course there's the story of that in the Exodus story, but it means so much more than that. It's not just about some, great sensational parting of waters. It's about God parting the seas of whatever threatens to overcome us in life, parting them in a way that we can walk through. It's deliverance. It's the deliverance that God showed to the Israelites, but it's the deliverance that God shows to us over and over and over again. The mercies and the opportunities of that deliverance. So that even in the last two verses of that psalm where it talks about how sometimes in following God, it leads us sometimes into things that feel like a snare. And sometimes it leads us into places where we feel the burdens on our back. And where it feels like sometimes, even when we're trying our best to follow God's way, that our enemies are riding over our heads. But that last half of that verse reminds us, you brought us out into a place of refreshment. And it's a reminder to remember that God continues to do that because great is God's faithfulness. And then when we move to 2 Timothy, we hear the saying that the writer quotes. And you don't really see it as well in here because they wrote it all in paragraph form. If you looked in your Bible, you would see this saying written more kind of like a poem or a song. And we think it may have been a part of a hymn at some time. But here it says, the saying is sure, if we have died with him, we will also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we deny him, he will deny us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot deny himself. What is that saying? What that's saying is that no matter what we do, God is faithful to us even when we're not faithful to Him. That one line that causes us so much trouble, if we deny Him, He will also deny us. What is that saying? If we deny God, God will deny our denial. That's what it's saying. If we deny God, God simply denies our denial. Regardless of what we do, we can even deny God and God will be faithful to us. Great is God's faithfulness. And then as we get to the gospel, and we see Jesus reaching out to people who He shouldn't have even been touching if He was going to be considered a good teacher and a good rabbi. And we see Him healing them whether or not they are foreigners like the Samaritan or Jews like the other 9. And healing them whether or not they are thankful like the foreigner or like the other 9 who were not thankful. Regardless of what they did, whether they were thankful or not, regardless of who they were, Jesus reached out to heal them because great is God's faithfulness. So great is God's faithfulness that it is with us in the times of our exile, when we feel like we're in exile. So great is God's faithfulness that it will deliver us from whatever trouble we manage to walk into. So great is God's faithfulness that it doesn't matter who we are, or even if we realize there's a God there to be faithful to or not. That is how great God's faithfulness is. But I said that this was about both God's faithfulness and our response. And as great as God's faithfulness is, when we get to our response, sometimes it's a little bit lacking. Sometimes our response isn't as great as God's faithfulness is. And I think that one reason that may be true is that just as God's faithfulness comes through in the mercies and opportunities that God offers us over the course of any or every day, most of the time we're going through our day on autopilot so much that we miss the mercies and we miss the opportunities. They just right over our heads. I was thinking about a day last week. And I had started off by the night before making a list of all the things I was going to accomplish that next day. And as I often do, I had probably about 3, 4, 5 times as many things on a list as any one person could humanly accomplish, but I thought I could. So I got up at 5 in the morning and I did my breakfast and I did my exercises and I did my meditation, and then I started going. Man, I hit the floor and I was running and I was grooving. I was knocking things off that list. And then I came over about 10 to do my office time, and my office time is supposed to be a time when I have appointments with some of you, and sometimes those are pastoral things, and sometimes we're working on ministry things that you're working on, and I'm trying to coach and guide and help you along, and then sometimes it's going out to visit somebody, and then a lot of times it's people that just happen to come in to work on Altar Guild or something like that, and my job is to take that opportunity and make that connection with you. That's a part of what I'm here for. And it's a part that I love, is being able to do that and make those contacts. So I knew that was going to happen. So I figured, okay, I'm going to get most of these things done by 10, or at least half of them done by 10. And then I'm going to do my things that I do usually in the day in relating to people. And then about 3 or so, I'm going to come back, I'm going to finish this all up, and by 6, bam, I'm going to be done. Guess how that worked? I mean, I was behind before I started, And I started feeling frustrated about that. And after I kind of had gotten back to it was like about 4 o'clock, I decided, well, I can work from 4 to 7 and knock the rest of this out. So I started feeling frustrated. But the more frustrated I felt about it, the harder I worked at it, the more I tried to get it done. And the more I tried to get it done, the less I got done. And the more mistakes I made. I jammed the printer. And so I had to stop. And then instead of taking the time to read it, I thought, I don't need to take time to read what knobs I'm supposed to turn. I can just do this myself. So I opened it and started pulling stuff out, and then I really messed it up. So then I had to actually get out and look at all sorts of things to do. And by the end of the time, I'd spent about an hour just trying to get this one thing printed, which I put on a table and promptly spilled my water on. And then in my hurry to clean up that, I knocked some other stuff off the desk. And then somebody called, and I made an appointment with them without looking at the calendar. And then after I got off the phone, I looked at the calendar and realized I had another appointment at that time. So then I had to call them back. It was a totally frustrating experience. And though the world didn't come to an end, I did not look at it as a perfectly good day. Now, there were several things I could have done over the course of that day. First of all, I could have been more realistic about my list, but as soon as I started feeling frustrated, I could have stopped. I could have stopped for a minute, looked at what was happening, and regrouped. I could have stopped and said, I can't do all this, I'm just going to do some of it. It was a beautiful day. I could have stopped for a while and just taken a walk, cleared my head. I could have stopped coming here to pray. I mean, there are lots of things I could have done when I started feeling frustrated, but instead I just kept plowing through. And you see, that's how we miss the mercies, because we miss the signals of when we should stop. We miss the signals of when we should stop and look and listen for the mercies that God is offering us and the opportunities of doing things differently that God's offering us. And interestingly enough, I have found that many of those signals to stop come in the form of negative feelings. The kind of feelings we don't want to have are usually a signal from God to stop. One of God's mercies. Let me give you some examples. The busyness, for example. As soon as we start feeling frantic and frustrated, if we would stop rather than just pushing our way through, we might begin to see that we either need to let some things go or that we need to just slow down and do things a little differently. It could be a signal, if we would take it, that when we feel frantic, that we need to stop and we need to look and listen at what's making us frantic and see where God's offering us opportunities to do that differently. Or say you've had a disagreement with somebody, or just in a conversation, either you said something that you wish you hadn't have said, or they said something that you wish they hadn't have said, and you're left feeling upset about it. A negative feeling. Now, if instead of just getting more and more and more upset, we would stop and look at that upset and ask ourselves, why am I so upset? I mean, is it with that person at all? Is it with myself at all? Do I need to just be gentle with myself right now and realize that, from time to time friends have disagreements? Do I need to go back and do something about it? Anything. If we just stop, if we realize the upset is a signal to stop instead of the upset as something to get caught up in. But we get caught up and we miss God's mercy. Or those times when I think, by golly, I can do this all by myself. And I am determined to do whatever it is all by myself. And I've seen you do that too. So I think I can say we, those times when we think we should do things all by ourselves. And the more we try, the results just aren't happening. And we start feeling burned out. And instead of realizing that the burnout is a signal to stop and possibly look for the opportunities for help that are out there, we just keep pushing through. But if we stop, if we realize that the feeling of burnout itself is a signal to stop and look around, perhaps there's somebody that really needs for us to ask them to use their skills in that way. Maybe they've just been waiting for us to ask and they wonder why we're so arrogant that we never do. Or maybe there's several people that could help. And the opportunities God is providing is for us to be this incredible team. We never see it if we miss the signal that burnout is a time to stop. All of these things and other kinds of negative emotions, they are God's signals to stop and look and listen. The way that God provides us with mercy, the way that God provides us with other opportunities, the way God's great faithfulness shows through in our lives. So if there's one thing that perhaps we could leave the room with today, it would be that realizing that God is greatly faithful, whether we miss God or not, we could perhaps become a little more responsible by letting those feelings that happen each and every day as we bump up against walls, letting them become stop signals to us, so that we can stop, look, and listen for the opportunities God provides. May it be so. Amen.